Hello, my name is Christopher Iwestel Kinman, and I want to welcome you to our second primary interview in our exploration of communal practices. I introduce you today to a remarkable human being. She is from Lisbon, Portugal, and her name is Dora Rebelo, and I apologize for not pronouncing her last name in the correct Portuguese manner. Dora's career is dedicated to the lives of those she called migrants, those who have escaped the impossibilities of their own homelands and are attempting to establish home in other places. Dora challenges the way that most people view the migrants. She sees them as equals who we can be in conversation with. She describes a work not of healing individuals, but of together building sanctuary communities. Communities which include the migrant and those who we might call the citizen. She describes a communal practice where the gifts of all are honored. She also talks about how the traditional forms of working with immigrants frames them in very distinct, narrow, and inescapable ways. Dora describes some important work that is happening around the world, particularly in Europe, that is citizen-based, that grows from a living investment in the gifts of these people's lives. But I must stop trying to explain Dora's interest in work. And I must allow Dora to tell these stories as she finds most fitting. Please take in the wisdom of Dr. Dora Rebelo. Thank you. I'm speaking today with Dora Rebelo. I've known Dora, at least on Facebook, for a number of years now. And I was very interested in having a conversation with Dora because of the work she's done, which has been with migrants in Europe, and the particular vision she has, which I'm very attracted to. I think it's really something that we need to pay attention to. And also Dora just completed her PhD, and you, if I remember right, you did it in anthropology, which is interesting too. I connect with that because when I did my PhD, I refused to do it in psychology or any other field like that. So I did it in a philosophy of education. So anyway, let's begin. And if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind starting with when we were talking previously. You kind of jokingly described yourself as a psychologist in recovery. I was wondering if we could use that as a stepping point to start this conversation. Maybe you could explain a little bit about, I know you're joking, but if you could explain a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much again for this invitation, for this pleasant conversation and sharing of ideas and thoughts. And yeah, starting with this point on the recovery from psychology, I think I joke about it because what I am trying to do is after many years working as a psychologist in the field, mainly in community-based work and humanitarian work, I am still unlearning a lot of the things that I sort of formatted my mind with doing psychology work or thinking in a way that was taught to me as being, the way to work with communities within the psychology field. And so I still am doing a lot of unlearning about this and also a little of relearning alongside the communities that I meant to be an ally of. I'm
That's it.
not, uh, yeah, I think it's a shift also on my understanding of what really matters for people. For a long time, I felt working in different types of organizations and settings, I felt a little bit the difference in power and privilege, and this never really supported the kind of transformation that I was interested in.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I witnessed how sometimes it was even harming for people. These processes and these formatted ways of acting of us psychologists. And particularly in the field of migration, which is a field where we encounter a lot of violences, structural violences, and discriminations, it is quite important to be critical and to look at the processes where we can become accomplices of such injustices and such harming processes. So I basically am trying to relearn now ways of doing this allyship that I'm interested in. Rather than supporting or helping, I'm trying to be an ally. I'm trying to stand in solidarity with people that I believe are being victims of injustice that are being perpetrated, particularly by the global north, towards people from the global south. And so this is why I say I am recovering, because I'm in this process of unlearning and relearning.
That's wonderful. And every sentence you said was packed, and it was like a spectrum. I could have gone all sorts of directions with it. And I think you've touched on some of what I want to ask, but I want to ask it more specifically. Um, First of all, what are you unlearning?
Mhm.
And secondly, what are you relearning?
Yeah. So I guess the unlearning is mostly about this idea of helping and of supporting people to heal, like being a sort of a guide into healing processes that I believe psychology, put in my mind
Yes.
with all the learnings on therapy and therapeutic processes and psychotherapy and community work even, although it's a little bit more participatory and a little bit more intended to create what is called, and I don't really like the term empowerment, or
Yes.
these kind of ideas, but still it is a process of inequality, and it's not really a process of what I believe it's more effective, which is really standing in solidarity and trying to understand how we can be useful. And it's not necessarily doing any role of a psychologist. Yeah, so moving towards a much more um, embedded, I think you have to start with your own vulnerability. So I think that what really influenced me was to be in the border, literally,
Yeah.
to understand the the differences between, for example, the my freedom of movement in the world, my privileges of citizenship. I was fortunate to be granted the possibility, for example, to work in different countries, to be an expatriate, to be a tourist, whatever. So I could explore the world in a way that was always associated to positives, to freedom, cosmopolitanism, freedom of movement, possibilities of knowing, and to a sense of owning or being entitled to a certain uh, possibility of being in the world as as a person in the world. And at the same time, being at the border and working with people that were not granted these same possibilities gave me the understanding of how the border can be violent, and how other people, particularly from the global south, are smashed by the border and are crushed by these different. When I say border, I mean it in a wider way, not just the physical border. I mean the policies, the different constructions of the world that divide the haves and the have-nots, and how these processes make people in a certain part of the world as if they were beyond the wall, and they cannot pass beyond that wall. So being at the border, you feel this vulnerability. You are a witness to this violence. And so having this vulnerability, you have to make I think you are obliged morally to take a stance or a position. Um, you have to make a choice on how you are going to relate with that. You can either ignore it and carry on, helping people, or trying to, support people by giving things that you have to people who need things that you have. That's a way of looking at it. Or you can actually address this injustice in what it is. It's an injustice. If you are going to do that, then you cannot relate to people in the same way. If you have experienced this vulnerability, then you have to make a room for other possibilities of relating with people. And for me, this was rediscovering solidarity in a way that is not humanitarian and is not embedded in all these institutional processes that I was for a long time enmeshed in.
That's fantastic. And so there's a different way of thinking about these human lives that is not, you're no longer a helper. You're no longer somebody who has helping people who have not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has to, that view inscribes people always lower.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a solidarity that it sounds to me attempts to try to a different type of conversation with them.
It is an attempt to relearn and to find ways to connect with people in a way that matters and in a way that is useful. There's this field of research called the public anthropology, which is about this. It's a sort of an attempt for people to actually do something that is useful for others, but not in that way of helping, but in a way that comes from the communities that they see it as useful. It's not doing something for, it's trying to really understand what is there to do. And, if you are interested in doing that, then you should be there and creating spaces for these kinds of conversations of what is useful, in fact.
So this is a move beyond healing, in particular psychological healing,
Mm-hmm.
towards what we can kind of co-create together that is useful, that is helpful. This is really interesting language to me. I'm just really intrigued. So keep on. We're talking about the unlearning and we're talking about the relearning.
There's an aspect of justice to it as well. I think that for a long time, I felt a little bit inactive in a way that I was doing the familiar. I was performing on the familiar,
Mm.
and we talked last time of one thinker and philosopher that uh, that we both read, Bayo Akomolafe, and
Oh, yes.
he talks about slowing down, and in slowing down, even in times of urgency and emergency, in slowing down, we can probably perceive better what is beyond the familiar, what is there beyond the familiar. And so I guess this is what I started to try to do, was slowing down and move a little bit out of my field, moving out of the urgency, the emergency response,
Mm.
the going into action and repeating the same processes. And what I started to do was trying to understand what else is there that is being done to support people on the move, and that is different, that can be interesting, that can be new, that can be unfamiliar. And so I started looking at community based initiatives that were initiated by regular people, on different localities. And this was the basis of my research in the past 5 years. And my interest was seeing beyond what are these regular institutional processes of helping, what else is there being created between regular people that meet people that are on the move in a different circumstance and different power and privilege inside these localities where they move. And what I saw was, particularly after 2015, when the so-called refugee crisis started, which was obviously never a crisis, really was performed as such by the institutions and by the European policies on migration to protect the European borders. Um, there was a movement there. There was a difference there, I noticed. When, for example, in Greece, many individuals, independent individuals, started to reclaim a different way of supporting. They were interested in finding a way of establishing relationships with refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, people on the move that passed by their territories, their homes, their neighborhoods, their cities. And so a lot of people in these experiences of encountering asylum seekers themselves, the human bonds that they created made a difference. And I could see several different aspects of this difference, which I felt was somewhat a transformation. And so I think that these bonds that were created through normal relationships, just, regular, having someone at your home, offering a dinner, having someone sleeping in your house for some time, getting to know this person, sharing meals, understanding what they go through, supporting in what they need, in whatever they need, but they themselves saying what they need.
Yeah.
In this experience, this very normal and simple experience of the encounter, a lot of people started to perceive changes in themselves and in their intimate lives, in their family lives, in the ways that they understand their role as citizens. People were transformed by the encounter with someone who does not hold the same citizenship privileges They were transformed by this notion of inequality in your face.
Yeah.
They were transformed by the idea that we all benefit from struggling against these injustices.
Mm.
It's something that um, it's bigger than us. There is a struggle here. People understand that when you face these injustices of not having an access to a legal paperwork that gives you the possibility to live the life that you want to live, to go to the places where you want to go to work, and to
Yeah.
raise your family and realize your dreams and aspirations in the same equality that any other person in Europe would have. This disparity, finding this in front of you, it creates something in people that makes them more, I guess, aware of their citizenship privileges, and also moves them towards acting their citizenship in different ways.
Mm.
So I saw many individuals who were quite apolitical. They were not very interested at all in discussing politics or engaged in any, social movement or whatever. But after these events of encountering someone in these circumstances of injustice, they were then engaged as some of them as activists in trying to address these issues in a much more active way. And they were also, some of them then, they were met by the violence of the border, for example, through the exercises of the criminalization of solidarity that started as well to take place here from 2015. Citizens that were arrested or prosecuted for supporting irregular migration, or, they were indicted with other crimes, espionage, and crazy things like that.
Oh
And
no.
yes, and so they themselves had to reclaim their right to act their citizenship in the way that they found ethical.
Mm.
And so this moved much more people towards a different way um, of being citizens in Europe. That was the interesting part of it. But yeah, definitely in Greece, even in this time of the crisis of austerity, there were a lot of social movements that were very interesting in that way. The social clinics, people started to form different coalitions of support to make sure that the inequalities and the injustices in society were reduced. But this was a more like equal to equal
Yeah. Yeah.
movement, sort of. Although I think it influenced then the solidarity of Greek people towards refugees, at least in the first years.
Mm.
Um, I think that they sort of smoothly moved from that solidarity that was already taking place to this solidarity, engaged solidarity that they demonstrated with refugees in the beginning. I guess in Greece, I think one of the most fantastic initiatives that I saw rising was the refugee hotel. And this started out as an initiative made by a place in the city of Athens that is quite known for its anarchist ideology. So for a long time, they have been resisting to different aspects of the political society by claiming, um, the need to do community work, social centers, to promote education, awareness, political awareness, and to support different people that are faced with difficulties at several levels in society. They are also working on environment activism. They are aware of how corporations in Greece are taking over some of the natural landscape, and they are trying to reclaim these landscapes for the people in Greece, and trying to make some awareness on these ecology principles. But so there is this notion already of the need to continuously be aware and practice citizenship. But during the refugee crisis of 2015, what they did was to try to imagine a center where people would not have a controlled environment. So the opposite of the humanitarian apparatus. They tried to create a place where people could have their own routines. They could be at their own house. It was a squatted house where people could live freely in the space, but they had the ownership of how they wanted to live in this place. So then, of course, the community that lived in the neighborhood helped in many different aspects that were decided together with the inhabitants, refugees. So they decided how they wanted, for example, education to take place for the children, what else was important for them to have access to, how they wanted to share the space with the communities. There was a negotiation between refugees and people who within the community wanted to support them. And it was a very free and democratic environment where people felt, like they were just in the regular hotel and just, having their regular life in the neighborhood, and they were a part of the neighborhood. And through time, I noticed these very interesting things taking place, like in the walls. Before, it was everything in Greek or in English or whatever, and after some time the walls started being written in Kurdish, Kurdish Sorani, Kurdish Sadini, the Arabic language. And then there were in the events as well some changes. There were Syrian dance classes. There were, Dawid, the Palestine Darwish, the Palestine poet. They were reciting them in some events. There were, language exchange meetings, Arabic, Greek, Greek Arabic, Kurdish Arabic. There were some actions of political demonstrations that were prepared in collaboration between refugees and the local community, etc. So I saw these transformations sort of growing through time, and of course, then also the crescendo of violence against this naturalization, this normalization of the space. As the place was being more comfortable and becoming more a part of the neighborhood, so was the opposition as well. And so in 2016 already there was a lot of pressure from the other side of society, like fascist groups, neo-Nazi groups, etc. There were some attacks to this place, and finally by 2017, 2018, a big campaign of evictions from these squatted places like this refugee hotel started to happen. There were many other places like this, social centers that were occupied, and they were having this sort of ethics of supporting people through this ideology, and they were all evicted. The last one was a camp in Lesbos called Pikpa Camp, which even received a prize, like a UNHCR prize for best community-based solution, best alternative to refugee camps. And ironically, right after receiving the prize, they were evicted. And they just had to leave the place after 4 years of hard work and building this kind of initiatives. But but solidarity does never, what I noticed that they can be faced with these harsh policies and difficulties, but it's like a fluid network. It never goes out. It's, you finish here, you start there. It's always like a little, yeah, it's kinds of, it finds a way to continue itself.
Well, this is fantastic. I mean, here are these people creating something, and if I can go back to, when you were talking about this, when you're talking about the writing on the wall,
Hmm.
um, and then this movement towards, Syrian dance classes and poetry, and it sounds like it was a movement far from helping the needy,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it was people coming to their own sense of culture, to their own sense of expression, in this context. And I was getting all excited about it, and then they were shut down.
Yeah,
And
it
but
has.
then you described something else, and I think it's important to go here. You're not talking about UN programs. You're not talking about government programs. You're talking about people living in response to life and finding a way. So they go from this to finding other ways.
There is a sense of subversion or subversity here. I think
Hmm.
it's caring for people as resistance, as a sort of a silent resistance in some ways. In
Yes.
some other ways, it's more vocal, and there are demonstrations, there are movements, there are advocacy movements, and so there are a lot of quite harsh activists as well. But there is a lot of silent caring for people, and just being there for people and trying to find ways to help people through these harsh difficulties. And
Hmm.
okay, so we are shut down here, let me try and find a solution somewhere else. Let me try with my contacts to find somewhere else where you can be safe,
Hmm.
and someone else who can continue to support you. Of course, this has a two-way two-way point of view. On one hand, you can see that these policies of mobility are so harsh that they continuously put people in precarious
Yeah.
living circumstances. It's a permanent limbo.
Yeah.
They are forced to be in these precarious living circumstances. But on the other hand, you can see the networks of resistance that can create within these harsh circumstances some safe spaces of like while you are here, we will make it as comfortable as possible, and we will try to make sure that while you are here, you have you have a place to stay, you have a place to belong. We care about you. It's not a solution for the most difficult problems that people face, but it's definitely a resistance movement.
One of the things that comes to my mind as I'm listening to you, and I've touched on this before, is the beginning of when I started this process off, I talked about the work of Matthew Fox, who's a theologian, and used to be a Catholic theologian, and he's not anymore. But he talked about the tradition of fall redemption, and that's from that tradition. There is people who are needy, and there's people who have, and they move down and help those who are needy. Um, and he challenged us on that tradition because so much of our Western world is built on that, even the secular world. Right? It's the argument has been made that the secular world is just a reinvention of the ecclesiastical world in many ways. But the opposite to that, what he put out there was these spiritual traditions, what he called creation spirituality. And this is what I felt and what I was hearing about these people, is that even when they were challenged in what they were doing, they together created other ways, not as a huge solution, but as a resistance to. They find ways, they try to find ways through and try to create ways through. And I have great admiration for that.
And there's also this idea, I think you mentioned from your mentor Lynn Hoffman,
Yeah.
you said that one of the things she liked to do was when you are stuck or when you cannot do something, add more bodies, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
This is what these movements actually try as well, because it's hard to carry on for
Yeah.
long. So they grow and they influence others to add to the network. And I was remembering as well this example that I told you about from Sweden, where a locality of supportive citizens had to expand beyond borders when Sweden started to deport or threat to deport asylum seekers that were first accepted as asylum seekers in the country, but then were refused their claim once they were 18. And what they did was to add bodies. They tried to find beyond the borders of Sweden where they could find more people to grow beyond Sweden and to recreate the same spirit that they started there of citizen support in other places. And so they had a very organized type of informal support where one or two people who had the chance to travel actually went to other countries and tried to recruit and to find, people that could connect to the young people who were forced to move beyond borders. And they prepared these places to be hospitable, to be ready to do exactly the same or something like what was started in Sweden. And this network grew so much across borders. They were in Portugal, they were in Italy, they were in France, in different places, not just in Paris, but in Paris more significantly. They were in the UK. So, it's interesting because at the same time that they were growing and they were trying to find safe places that were uh, replicating the same principles of civil society support, informal solidarity, etc. At the same time, they were sort of rehabilitating and trying to find as well some appease to the loss of what they understood before as being a nice country. They always found Sweden as a very hospitable country for refugees until the moment where they perceived no, it's not. Because of these encounters that they had with these young people, they realized no, actually, my country is not hospitable at all. They have quite racist policies, and what they are doing is unfair. So they had the need to go beyond Sweden to create these communities of support that somehow recreated their imagined community, their imagined Sweden, the one that they really wanted to be a part of.
Was this what you told me? I think you called the New Sweden or something
Yeah,
like that. Was that the language?
Well, they don't refer to it as such, but I wrote it something like that in my
Yeah.
thesis after talking to some of the Solidarians and as well as some young people that were in Sweden for a long time. Some of them for 4 years, 3, 4 years. So they spoke the language. They made friends. Some of them, they called their supporters in Sweden as family. They felt as they were home. They were a part of the family. And so those are really strong human bonds that they created there. And so for them, they are not just Afghani or Iraqi. Most of them that I met were Afghani. They are Afghani Swedish. And so in the same way, they are seen by their supporters or their allies as Afghani Swedish because they were known and they started to create this bond in Sweden, and they continue it by recreating the same ethics of care now outside, and yes, also reclaiming more justice while they do it. So, for example, in France, there is this group called Les Amis des Migrants Suédophones en France, so the friends of migrants that speak Swedish in France. And basically, it's a
I love
small
how complicated this is. I love it.
in this very small neighborhood where they have a lot of people who have been in Sweden or are Swedish migrants.
Yeah.
They recreated this informal network of care where young men that come from Sweden are placed in different houses, and they become part of the family, they become part of the neighborhood, and together they have some actions of activism towards what is going on in Sweden. They stay informed, they network, they become stronger, become more strong to make a sort of a sanctuary in this neighborhood for others.
I'm really struck by this almost dialectic that goes on. There's this creativity and this resistance, followed by resistance against the resistance and heartbreak,
Mhm.
followed by more creativity and resistance. There's something um, very encouraging about that. That people keep on.
Yeah, it's some authors. I think it's Thomas uh, Kirsch, if I'm not mistaken. He says this is like making politics by other means in a way.
Making politics by other means.
Means it's as we don't have access to the other way, we do politics by other means. We try to find ways of creating the society or the community that we want to see, that we want to be a
Yes.
part of. It's an
Yes.
I think it's a more, I think I told you as well, it's a more feminist ethics of care in a way. Yeah, I think it's based on this idea that nation states, policies,
Hmm.
institutions, they were mostly formed under very patriarchal ways of doing. And, the feminine always stayed a subaltern part of these structures that were created, right? In terms of how power and privilege is constructed in
Yeah.
society. The
Yeah.
feminine always stayed under a subaltern way of existence, and associated with care, associated with emotions, associated with these other different ways of experiencing the world. And I believe that, in a way, what we are attempting here in terms of alternatives is a form of feminine ethics of care, is a different side of hospitality, not so much in the Derrida way of seeing hospitality, but
Yes.
more in the sense of adding this idea of caring for other people and trying to find ways of ethics and responsibility through care, which is something that institutions and the regular ways of doing don't think about, don't
No.
use. Care is out of the equation there.
Yes. And let's talk a bit about caring, because I think you're right. I think it's something that is, in many contexts, at best thought of as cute,
And
right? Um,
yeah.
and at worst, it's just belittled.
Mhm.
Um, Tell me more about this concept of caring and how you've encountered it.
It's definitely seen as the naive
Yes,
uh,
yes,
kind of support or the naive kind of doing things.
yes,
However, it's also a resistance to what is the alternative, which is the absolute non-caring for people, the idea of formatting people to policies, processes. This idea that I think is embedded in the institutions and the regular way of
mm,
that we inherited of even I think the idea of gift giving is based on this same idea of
yes,
hierarchy of in order to be helped, you almost have to be grateful for the way that it is given to you, right? There is no space for individuality. There is no space for for people to add their value there. It's more like fitting people into little
mm,
boxes and categories. Actually, the all the language of mobilities is based on that. You put people on the boxes of being migrants, economic migrants, or asylum seekers, or even within the asylum seekers, are you really worthy? Are you a valid refugee? Can we actually accept you as a refugee? Do you have a rightful claim for
right,
asylum? Or are you one of those doubtful situations? There's all these sorts of categories that people are expected to prove that they are worthy of in order to access the kind of institutionalized support that is provided. All this is wrong. And so I think these alternatives of care are exactly trying to achieve something that moves away from this and is more close to personalizing and giving space to people to add and to count and to be a part of, to belong in a different way. So it's more creative, it's more open, and of course, in the institutional language, it's not sustainable, it's not reliable, it's naive. But I think it's in a way, it's a sort of it's a micro politics. It's that way of insisting on creating something different and thinking about alternatives and sticking with the human bonds, because all of the other provisions of care that we have through institutions are a way to break human bonds. When we categorize, we lose these human bonds, these connections. We find the refugee, the migrants, this center of support for migrants from this country, this, this project to support vulnerable migrant women. We lose the human bonds. And within these more caring, nurturing projects, we find the individuals. We find Ahmed, Ahmar, Janet, who sings music from this country, and Celestine, who is a choreographer from this country, and this person who teaches Arabic and comes from this country. We find the human bonds, and within the human bonds, of course, we can be more creative and find different expressions of how we can be together and how we can add to each other. It's not inclusion. It's not this idea of social inclusion. It's the idea of togetherness and recreate something and actually gain something by being together, by being with different people.
Yes. Do you remember the Norwegian psychiatrist Tom Andersen?
Absolutely.
He described his work as the art of human bonds. And you're using that same language. He didn't even say the art of creating human bonds, just the art of human bonds. And that's how he described his work. And it's so I see this reminiscence, to Tom Andersen as I'm listening to you as well. He refused the psychiatric kind of typical medical ways of looking at things. And his work was the art of human bonds. I don't know how long we've gone on. I could go on forever. This is really interesting. There's every line you give is loaded with potentials. It reminds me of remember Bakhtin, the Russian philosopher. He used the concept of while the Western world tries to narrow language down, he used the concept of the ray word, like it's like a ray of light going into a prism and then expanding out, and that's how it felt. That's how it has felt listening to you. Every gift of language was like a ray word where we could have gone in so many directions. And it leaves one both encouraged and disappointed, because I want to go to all those places as well. Maybe we'll revisit this. But I'm wondering. I know we've been on for a while, so I'm wondering if you had any kind of closing thoughts, particularly with this regarding this exploration of communal practices. I'm wondering if you just have any closing thoughts after this conversation.
Well, I guess I'm very curious to follow up on this work that you are doing. I think it's really important and needed at this time. And I'll be very curious to follow it up. I guess I'm particularly interested in finding out how we can explore these communal practices at our localities, at how we can expand this in our localities, how we can make it bigger, and this idea also of interconnectedness, of having these dialogues between people in different localities, finding resonance in what we are doing in different places.
Yes.
And working on these human bonds by networking and dialoguing with each other. But I'm particularly interested in this, in exploring the locality and trying to find within the power that we already have, because we do have power that sometimes we don't acknowledge, in our ways of always working in the familiar, this idea that bioaccumulafi says that we sometimes just have to slow down and look around and just try to find deeper, not necessarily doing more, but trying to find deeper how we can improve what we already are doing. So I'm interested in exploring this with you and with all your guests in these dialogues, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot.
Really looking forward to seeing how this all unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And thank you again for inviting. It's really an honor.
No, no, thank you. I could have gone all day, and but apparently I've got other work to do, so I can't.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you, and I'll let you know when we're ready to upload this.
Absolutely. Have a nice day. Take care.
Thanks, Dora.
Bye bye.
Bye.